Last Sunday, we dove into Acts chapter 10, where we learned that Peter was invited to see the world differently so that he could continue to live into God's will. I just loved the story where Peter is reminded to not call anything impure or unclean what God has called clean. See, God used this vision in Peter's life to propel him forward into the next chapter in the mission of God, to share the good news of Jesus with the Gentiles. This vision for Peter, it happened at a really unique and interesting place. And it's one that we oftentimes read and skim over, but in verses 5 and 6 in chapter 10, we read that Peter is at a man named Simon's house. We learn that Simon is a tanner and his house is by the sea. Now, it's really significant that we unpack this because there's some interesting cultural implications here. So like I said, Simon was a tanner. And in that day and age, tanners' homes were put by the sea on purpose. This was not like a fancy house resort, by the water, but it was put out of town on purpose because tanneries smelled horrible. I mean, imagine the work that was done there and the smell that was coming from that place. They were put out of town and cast aside, and people avoided the tanneries, but they also avoided the tanners. Simon was likely a Jewish man, scholars say, but yet he was probably a Jewish man that was on the fringes of society because of his vocation. He was oftentimes ceremonially unclean because of his occupation as well. But it's there at the tannery at Simon's house where Peter receives this vision that was going to propel him to take some big steps of faith and steps of obedience. See, I believe Peter intentionally went to Simon's house to care for and be a friend to someone who the world had avoided, who most people didn't even think of or pay attention to. Peter made an intentional decision to go to Simon's house. And it was at Simon's house that Peter received this incredible call to move forward and go to Cornelius' house and open the door to the Gentile mission. And I don't think that was by accident. In some of the research I was doing, it was so amazing to see the hand of God in this journey, these different steps of faith. I was reading a commentary on Acts from Richard Thompson, and he says this: Peter's stay with someone of marginal religious and social status may have helped prepare him for the next step in the Christian mission. Isn't that cool? That God was preparing Peter even when he was unaware. But it was Peter's willingness and obedience to follow God, no matter what, that all of these little steps that opened up the door to the Gentile mission. See, Peter was willing to take a step and go to Simon's house. And then that step propelled him to go to Cornelius' house. And the story continues. It's a beautiful picture of the fact that obedience in the present impacts the future. And the same is for us. God is preparing us as we continue to say yes in the smallest and the biggest of ways. I don't know what you feel like God may be preparing you for, but I want you to know that today is significant in your preparation. All of your yeses to God today make a difference in the future. Maybe you feel like you need to change your vocation, or maybe you've even had a job change that you didn't anticipate because of COVID. But maybe that's an invitation from God to start dreaming about the future and laying a groundwork for your next steps. Maybe some of you are students in college and you're thinking about changing your major. And I know that's a big deal. I changed my major 4 times in college. And every time it was challenging and stressful, but I'm so glad I did. Others of you may be thinking, I want to use my voice and my platform. Maybe it's just your social media page. Maybe you want to use your voice and platform to bring about hope and bring about a positive change in our world. and really share these messages of peace and love with a world that desperately needs it right now. Maybe some of you are thinking that it's time for you to pick up the phone and call a friend that you haven't talked to in 10 years and just check in and see how they're doing. No matter what it is that God is asking you to do today, I believe that we need to be reminded that our yes today impacts tomorrow, that our obedience today impacts the future. And this season looks a lot different than any of us would have ever anticipated. But instead of just waiting for it to go by, instead of waiting for it to just be done and over, what if instead we ask God to help prepare us for the future? Because I believe, my friends, that all of our daily yeses add up to the big picture. Sometimes it's easy to get focused on all these things that we want to see happen down the road, but we're on the road now. Our lives are most of the time not these gigantic leaps of faith, but living into our purpose actually happens as we say yes one step at a time. So my friends, let's continue to say yes. Let's continue to ask God to prepare us for the future as we say yes to Him in obedience now. Have a great rest of your week.